Hi, everybody. Good afternoon. Thank you so much for coming. And we're going to get started because we're hoping that we can make comments about this case before it starts to pour rain on us. So we're here because today the United States Supreme Court ruled against women's reproductive freedom in Trump versus Pennsylvania and another related case. We know that millions of women across our country currently obtain birth control at no cost through their employer-sponsored health plans. We also know that more than 61.4 million women in the United States have birth control coverage with zero out-of-pocket costs, according to the National Women's Law Center. And the federal government estimates that between 70,500 and 126,400 women would immediately lose access to no-cost contraception services under this exemption. And we're here today because we believe that an employer's personal beliefs and opinions should never interfere with a woman's own personal health care decisions, and because we believe that this interpretation of the Supreme Court discriminates against women by denying them equal access to preventative care under the Affordable Care Act. And as Associate Justice Ruth Bader Ginsburg said, this decision not only discriminates against women, but will leave many to hunt for other government programs that might cover them or have to pay out of pocket. We think that women deserve equal, unencumbered access to birth control, regardless of where they work, and we're proud that Connecticut has been a leader nationwide that protects that right and more. Our Constitution protects the right of women to make reproductive health care decisions. In Connecticut, we've protected women's access to contraception and other preventative health care services without out-of-pocket costs. We've enshrined key health care provisions of the Affordable Care Act into our state law, and we've passed legislation that protects pregnant women from discrimination in the workforce. But we know that while we're a model, we need to do more, and so we're here because we want to continue to ensure that Connecticut is a national leader to fight for reproductive freedom, especially as the Trump administration continues to do everything they can to eliminate healthcare access, particularly for women. And it's critical that we elect women leaders and men leaders at all levels of government, municipal, state, and federal, to fight back against this injustice. And so that means we all need to rededicate ourselves to protecting the right to choose and our reproductive freedoms. And with that, it is my great pleasure to introduce someone who's been a fierce fighter and advocate for women's reproductive health care, our Senator Richard Blumenthal.
Thank you. Thanks, Susan. Thank you for your continually championing this cause. Thanks to our governor, who has been at the forefront throughout his career, and other leaders who are with us today, including the mayor. There is no underestimating the profoundly egregious effect of this decision. Let's be very blunt. This decision exacerbates a perfect storm in healthcare for our country right now. It exacerbates the dual crisis in our country of systematic racism and COVID-19. We know right now that systematic racism in our healthcare system has already put a disproportionate burden of the pandemic on our Black and Latino communities. This decision aggravates, widens, deepens the disparities in healthcare that discriminate against Black and Latino women. And it is profoundly damaging. Second point, no state, not even Connecticut, can protect itself from this decision because its effect is on the availability of vital medical health care for women. This medical care is time sensitive. It is critical to women having control over their bodies, their futures, their families. And its effect will be far-reaching. Now, this decision is also deeply wrong on the law, and it is not the end, I emphasize, not the end of the legal story here. This decision is not the end of the line legally, and the concurring decision makes clear that at least 2 justices who voted with the majority would likely strike it down, this regulation, if it comes back on the grounds that it's overbroad. The United States Supreme Court said under this statute, the Trump administration has, quote unquote, sweeping authority to promulgate this kind of regulation. It has the authority to establish this rule under the statute. But it didn't reach a lot of critical questions here. And so legally, this decision is not the end of the story, and you can be assured that legally we will fight this battle. But let's be realistic. Again, just very bluntly, 5 justices are probably there to vote in favor of this rule on this Supreme Court. So elections matter. They have consequences. The President of the United States, a new president, could pull this rule, rescind it, withdraw it. That's what a new president should do. This one won't. But elections matter. They have consequences. And they will have the biggest consequences on the lives of poor women, women of color, people in those communities. And this decision simply exacerbates systematic racism in our healthcare system that already disproportionately burdened women in those communities in this pandemic. Let me just finish on this point. I will be working with colleagues to introduce legislation that will override this regulation. We did it in the last Congress. It is a bill called the Protect Access to Birth Control Act. I was one of the leading co-sponsors. I will be working with colleagues to introduce it again. It is very short, 2 pages. 2 pages is all it will take to rescind this rule by the United States Congress. I call on my colleagues to support this Protect Access to Birth Control bill, which we are going to work with colleagues to reintroduce and make sure that women's health access is protected. To the women of Connecticut and America, the message today should be, you have a right to control your futures. You have a right to control your bodies and your families and your health care. And we are going to fight as long and hard as necessary to make sure that that right is protected. Thank you.
Senator, thank you so much. Attorney General William Tong could not be here, but we're very happy to have the Deputy Attorney General, Peggy Chappell, to say a few words.
Thank you. In the interest of beating the rain, I'll keep my remarks brief. On behalf of Attorney General Tong, I want to echo everything that the previous 2 speakers said. This ruling, although not unexpected, is still very disappointing. Connecticut was part of a multi-state effort that filed an amicus brief in the Supreme Court to support women's health, support the right to affordable birth control. And I just want to read a short statement from the Attorney General. Today's decision is extremely disappointing and will negatively impact the health care of tens of thousands of women across the country. The Trump administration has weaponized the rulemaking process in their war on women and the Affordable Care Act and put the health and well-being of millions of Americans at risk. Religious expression is not an excuse to discriminate against or deny basic health coverage to your employees. And as Senator Blumenthal said, elections matter, and with a new administration, hopefully we can get this reversed. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Madam Deputy, I'd like to introduce Governor Ned Lamont.
Thank you, everybody. And following all these great attorneys, we got the makings of a pretty good Supreme Court here, I think. This one's pretty good. I'm thinking about the one down in Washington where we could use a little bit of help. Let me just say about this ruling from my point of view. They can tell us the legal side of this. I was a big believer in the Affordable Care Act. You know, Dick mentioned discrimination, and one of the things the Affordable Care Act has ended discrimination. It ended discrimination against people with pre-existing conditions. It ended discrimination against women. The Affordable Care Act ended discrimination against women. You remember, women had to pay higher rates. It was maternity. It was, breast cancer screenings. A lot of reasons they use as excuses to discriminate against women. And one of the things the Affordable Care Act has ended that discrimination and made sure that contraception was included for each and every working woman around this country. Make sure that was the law of the land. And I thought this was settled law. I thought the right to contraception, I thought the right to choose. You know, I'm old. I thought this went back to when I was a kid. I thought this was established law. And it just reminds you that every day you got to stand up and keep on fighting. And as, Dick Blumenthal said, you can change the law with a new president. You can change the law with a new court. And let's get a few more senators who are pro-choice, pro-women, pro-contraception. We're not going to let this happen again. And Susan and I definitely will not let it happen here in Connecticut. We're going to make sure your right to contraception and choice is covered as best as we can. Thank you, everybody.
Governor, thank you. I'd next like to introduce our treasurer, Sean Wooden.
Thank you. And I am happy to be here in the rain because this is critically important. I'm the state treasurer, but I come from a tradition of a people, of African Americans, that know what it's like for the highest court in the land to discriminate and to not mete out justice. That's my tradition, and that's why I stand here today. This decision discriminates against tens of thousands of women and others who menstruate. This decision, rooted supposedly on religious freedom, and as a person of faith, I will tell you that my faith does not teach me to discriminate. It does not support that result. And that's what we have here. It's wrong. As a treasurer, I will tell you that this is bad for our economy. Studies have shown that women, when they have the right to control their reproductive rights, their birth control, when they have the right, they have better educational outcomes. They have better employment decisions and opportunities that they can make. And when we do that for everyone, we are at a time in our country when we are faced starkly with what a health pandemic looks like for people who are often marginalized, of what a race pandemic looks like for people who are often marginalized. And this decision and the Trump administration's continued efforts to divide, to undermine us in terms of the progress that we keep trying so desperately to make as a country. This is just another nail in that coffin. But I have hope. This is not the end. This is just another stop on the journey towards equity and justice for all. And all of us and a whole lot of other people in Connecticut, in this nation, are going to continue to fight. And so thank you all for being here. And I look forward to continuing this journey with you. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Treasurer Wooden. I'd like to invite up the Mayor of Hartford, Luke Ronan.
Good afternoon, everybody. Thank you so much, Lieutenant Governor, Governor, Senator, Treasurer, and everyone else who is standing up here today. We're standing up here today because we believe in the basic principle that reproductive health care is health care, and that the right to health care includes the right to reproductive health care. Donald Trump does not believe that. From day one, Donald Trump has launched an assault on Americans' health care. He said that he would chip away on Americans' access to affordable health care, and that's exactly what he's done. He said that he would chip away at women's right to access reproductive health care, and that's exactly what he's done. And this decision is about an attack that Donald Trump's administration launched to do both things at the same time, to chip away at access to health care and to chip away at a woman's ability to access reproductive care, and to deny the basic principle that reproductive health care is health care. And it's important to say that by deciding as they have, the Supreme Court has allowed that attack to take place. But it's equally important to say that that attack was launched by Donald Trump and his administration. Donald Trump and his administration launched this attack on health care and reproductive health care. The Supreme Court blessed it, but we can change it by going to the ballot box this November and demanding change. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you so much, Mayor. On behalf of the Women's Caucus, I'd like to introduce State Representative Susan Johnson.
Thank you so much, and I just have to also express my incredible discouragement by the Supreme Court decision today. But I also want to say how thankful I am to be here in Connecticut with so many wonderful leaders that are ready to stand up and make sure that women have access to reproductive care, to make sure that they have access to health care. This is a fabulous state to live in. We are leaders in health care. I go and travel all throughout the country, and I know exactly what's going on in many of our states, which isn't very good for women's health. I also know that we have in this country overall many, many women of color who are dying in childbirth, and this will only increase that number because people who are poor, women of color, they are dying, they're not getting the kind of care they need, and by not having access to birth control, we will increase those deaths in maternity, in childbirth. So I am very glad to be here standing with all these wonderful leaders, and I will continue the fight with them to make sure health care here in this state and do the best I can to help other states make sure women have access to health care, to reproductive care, so they can take control of their lives and the economies of those states will be healthier for it. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Representative. I want to acknowledge State Representative Maria Horn. Thank you so much for coming. Really appreciate it. And now I'd like to bring up Liz Gustafson, who's the State Director of NARAL Connecticut.
Hi everyone, my name is Liz Gustafson and I'm the State Director of NARAL Pro-Choice Connecticut. Today's Supreme Court decision sets a dangerous precedent for further attacks on birth control access and allows virtually any employer, mass, or university to claim religious or moral exemptions when denying birth control coverage to students and employees. This is not just wrong, this is discriminatory. The public health crisis caused by COVID-19 has highlighted just how important access to health care is. Coverage of all forms of birth control without out-of-pocket expenses enables people to meet their needs, which may change during a crisis like this. This case is a part of a larger attempt by the Radical Rights Campaign to ultimately roll back our reproductive freedom and control bodily autonomy. The Trump-Pence administration cannot be allowed to put its dangerous ideology above our health and well-being, not during a public health crisis, not ever. Everyone deserves access and coverage of birth control, of all of the birth control methods and the ones that are right for them, and the freedom to make personal decisions about their reproductive health without interference from educational institutions, their employers, or the government. NARAL Pro-Choice Connecticut is committed to fighting alongside our legislative champions, healthcare providers, and other allies throughout our state to protect against anti-choice attacks and expand reproductive freedom. Thank you again for having us here today, and thank you so much.
Liz, thank you so much. And our final speaker is Gretchen Rath of Planned Parenthood. Gretchen.
Thank you. Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Gretchen Rath, Senior Director of Public Policy and Advocacy with Planned Parenthood Votes Connecticut. And you've already heard it. Today's Supreme Court decision is just egregious. As the nation faces a public health crisis, the Trump administration really isn't letting up on its relentless attack on healthcare. People need more access to healthcare, not less. It's deeply concerning that in the year 2020, this is still up for debate, right? Birth control is essential healthcare. It's not controversial. Nearly 9 out of 10 women in the United States have used birth control in their lifetime. And COVID-19 is pushing our healthcare system and our economy beyond their limits. Birth control is critical, time-sensitive medication that treats serious illness and medical conditions and allows people to plan if and when they get pregnant. Restricting access will only put people's health more at risk at a time when people are already facing health crises and economic uncertainty due to shrinking income, rising unemployment, and difficult decisions on how to make ends meet. Connecticut, I just want to lift up that Connecticut played such an important historic role in ensuring birth control access. The Supreme Court decision, Griswold versus Connecticut, decided nearly 50 years ago, affirmed a right to privacy that struck down restrictions on contraception. And now the conservative-leaning United States Supreme Court is chipping away at our reproductive rights and restricting access to basic sexual and reproductive health care. It has to stop, and it has to stop now. That's why it's so important, as others have said, to elect champions on the local, state, and federal level that will continue to fight back against these federal attacks to our healthcare and our rights. In 2018, we proudly, in the state of Connecticut, passed proactive policy to protect the preventative healthcare benefits of the Affordable Care Act because we knew what was happening at the federal level, and as Congress tried to repeal the Affordable Care Act, and we knew what the Trump-Pence administration was aiming to do. And our state law ensured that the 10 essential benefits and the no-cost sharing copays to birth control was codified into state law. While we're proud of this legislation that requires private insurance plans to cover contraceptives and provide protection to many residents in Connecticut, state laws, unfortunately, cannot reach all types of insurance plans. So we know that many people will be left behind by these new restrictions, especially people with low incomes and people of color who already are facing significant barriers to accessing the health care they need. The people who have benefited most from guaranteed birth control coverage are people of color and young people, right? This isn't accidental. It's yet another part of the network of oppressive tactics that reinforces white supremacy that this administration is upholding. This ruling threatens to turn back the progress we've made and uphold systemic racism that widens the gap between people who have access to health care and people who don't. And the fact that the court allowed this attack on birth control coverage in 2020, which has benefited over 62 million people, as people have already said, shows the war on reproductive health care is not just about accessing abortion, it's about everything. So this ruling is an example of the important role states play, like Connecticut, play in protecting access to health care. But that's not enough, right? It shouldn't be just up to the states. It should be that the federal government is committed and needs to step up and make sure every person, no matter where they live, can access essential health care. We will not stand for this, and we will never back down from this fight. Now more than ever, we need to expand access to reproductive health care like birth control and not take it away. Thank you for taking time today, and thank you for our elected officials and leaders for inviting us here to speak.
Gretchen, thank you so much, and we'll take any questions.
Connecticut law provides an exemption for religious employers because of that. Contraceptive coverage.
You know that?
Can you repeat the question?
Connecticut law provides an exemption from requirements to cover contraceptives for religious employers, does it not?
I'm not sure which law you're referring to.
It's been a law for a while. I wrote about it the last time that the Attorney General commented on this case, so does Connecticut law provide an exemption for existing for religious employers? We have advocates here.
Thank you for that question, and please jump in, Senator, if you have comments too. We do have an exemption for religious employers in our state coverage, but it does not allow for-profit corporations to be exempted, and it is limited to religious employers and does not have the broad exemption for moral exemptions like this rule does.
And so this ruling will allow all employers in Connecticut to opt out, correct?
Let me just say, the litigation is about the breadth of the federal exception. The interpretation of the federal exception could well affect state courts in interpreting ours. There's no guarantee that it will. The point here is that our state law has presumably a narrower exception, and our state courts could interpret it more narrowly. The Supreme Court of the United States has, in effect, given sweeping authority, and they use that word, sweeping authority, to this administration to cut back on insurance coverage.
Anybody give a succinct summary of the limitations of Connecticut's regulation? So when these laws have come out, the laws that were intended to protect as much of the AC Act as they could, the limitation was described on the floor of the General Assembly as non-covered, self-funded, employer-based insurance. And there were certain other employer-based. So does anybody have a quick summary of what are the limits as to what Connecticut can do by statute in this area? Anybody wants to interact with that?
Quickly, the Affordable Care Act is the employer-based plans that are. I'm sorry. The employer-based plans are. You have two types of plans. The one type that's regulated. That's what we are talking about here. Then you have the self-insured that are not regulated, and that is a different set of laws and all kinds of things that go into that. So these are regulated plans that we're speaking of, and that's about as quickly as I can answer it without going into any more detail. But that's essentially what we have. We have the regulated and unregulated. Self-insurance is unregulated, and the rest are regulated.
Does anybody have an estimate as to how many people would be impacted by this decision today?
No, we have the Women's Law Center that said that it was between 70,500 and 126,000.
That's the national figure.
Women nationally, but we don't know what the number is for Connecticut.
Actually, the figure is probably much larger. The figure that has been used in the litigation, just in terms of the numbers of women affected nationally, is 60
in a self-insured plan.
Yeah, the numbers nationally are 62 million women are benefited under these plans. 62 million, and then 17 million Latino, 15 million Black women. That's the universe of people who have benefits under these plans. And
the senator's right.
But those are national figures.
Yeah, it's the 61.4 million women is according to the National Women's Law Center that the senator gave, and it's the federal government that is saying that 70,000 to 126,000 women will be affected. So you see there's a big discrepancy.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.
Thank you.
In the rain, or?
We're all having fun.